ladies and gentlemen, dear committee, I'm very pleased and proud to be here, not on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the Boğazköy excavation team, and especially of all those who worked there before me, because Boğazköy is one of those sites which has a very long archaeological history of archaeological research. So I will show you later also to whom we might be also very grateful leading teams there. We are in the middle of central Anatolia, or even a little bit in the northern part of central Anatolia, in an area with a barren landscape, very cold winters, dry and rather hot summers, and very rough terrain. So geography is one of the markers of this city, and we will see how this shaped at least some part of social life in history in a minute. Research started very early in 1834. First reasonable and systematic excavations took place between 1906 and 1912 in a combined effort by the Istanbul Archaeological Museums and a group financed by the German Oriental Society. And this administrative feature, I want to pronounce, made it possible that only very, very few artifacts from Boğazköy are today outside of Turkey. And this is important, and it's an important difference in comparison to other Near Eastern large site excavations. And then, as I already mentioned, under the umbrella of the German Archaeological Institute, research continues continuously since 1931 under those directors shown here. Their research, of course, Hattusha, Boğazköy Hattusha is the capital city of the Hittite Empire, and that was always at the focus of research. But all the teams worked there, even from the very first beginning, paid also attention to what they found of periods later than the Hittites and earlier than the Hittites. So nowadays we are able to reconstruct and compare with each other the very long settlement seasons from a very long settlement sequence, starting in the early or mid-6th millennium BC and virtually going until continuing until the present day. On the right side, you can see the steps of the urban development on which we will focus. The urban development is takes especially place in the 2nd millennium BC and starting in the very late 3rd millennium. The first excavations, or the early excavations, started here in the temple area, which is the largest building excavated in Hattusha and one of the largest in the Hittite Empire. We just heard about the function of monumental architecture. It has been probably built in the 17th or 16th century BC. It's a three-folded structure. We have the temple in the middle. Sorry. The pointer doesn't work too much, and the temple in the middle, surrounded by large storerooms and an administrative building to its south. The temple is, as I said, surrounded by economical structures, by large storerooms. I don't want to go into detail, but just to mention, that points out how the temple was used, or how the temple as an institution is also an economical issue as a retailer, and the temple also functioned as a landowner, etc. That is where the revenues came from. Some of the large pithoi excavated here are still preserved in situ. This kind of storage is for the short and mid-term storage. We will later see other functions. Another focus of the excavations were, you see, they were mainly focusing on the state remains, were the royal palace on the Büyükkale, a distinctive Anatolian architecture surrounded each function of the palace is surrounded around large courtyards, but every function occupies an independent building. And the whole structure was accessible over two bridges. You can see them on the plan down here, so the king could ride on the chariot into his palace. In the course of the 16th century, the size of the city was nearly doubled, and excavated, especially in the 80s, the upper city marks really a turning point in the urban history of Hattusha. It is because this part of the city is mainly representative. It's only dotted or mainly dotted with temples, official buildings, public structures, and surrounded by large fortification walls, which were also partly researched. Here you see a general view of the temple area. They are interestingly all located in one particular plane. The connection to the outside world, outside the city, is completely cut off. And that gives the impression of a very organized and very structured artificial area. The city gates I mentioned, they are quite monumental. The length of the overall length of the city wall is about 8 kilometers. So you can imagine how much impact that had. But these walls or these gates have one special feature, and I want to mention this because it is absolutely unique in the old world of Eurasia, because in the second millennium, there's no other site which had rounded gates. So the passageway has a rounded cover, and they are decorated with these, or some of them are decorated with reliefs. Also in the upper town are, on the rocky outcrops which were integrated into the urban planning, some features or buildings, large buildings located. They are probably connected to the ancestors' cults. So for the deceased kings who became gods after passing away, such buildings on high rocky outcrops were erected. The most spectacular building is what I sometimes call the crown of the city, Yerkappe. It's an artificial building, 250 meters long, 80 meters wide, and up to 40 meters high on an artificial mound. With these glaciers, there is a tunnel going through a postern, which in this case, or in this period when it was built, had no more any defensive function, but it was completely ritual as part of a procession way connected to these temples I mentioned. You can see one of those temples there just in the back. They are topographically quite close to each other, and as on top of the structure, there's a gate decorated with 4 sphinx. Outside the city, there is lies a open air sanctuary called Yazılıkaya. Unfortunately, we do not know the original Hittite name of it. It consists of 2 chambers. The main chamber A is on the right. On the right from you, is built up like a normal temple, only with the specialty that the core of the temple, the aditon or the cella, was not built or was not covered. This ritual place goes back to the 3rd millennium BC, and although I cannot show it here due to time, one can see the religious transformation from the 3rd millennium and the transformation of beliefs from the 3rd millennium to the late 2nd millennium. What we see here is the decoration of the late 2nd millennium, when the Hittite religion was not any longer a purely Hittite or Anatolian religion, but resembles as a conglomerate, and with mainly Hurrian, so to say, northern Syrian, northern Mesopotamian impacts, the pantheon of the empire as a whole, and that is quite interesting to see here. Together with archaeological finds, with many archaeological finds I cannot present here, these cuneiform tablets were found, about 32,000 fragments. Unfortunately, or in the earlier years, they found also very good, very large tablets. We are refrained to these smaller ones, bits and pieces. But anyway, thanks to these tablets, we have a very interesting and very deep insight into the society of the late Bronze Age Anatolia. There are generations of scholars, especially from Germany, but also from other countries in the world, Turkey especially. But thanks to the decipherment of Friedrich Rosny, we know that Hittite is the oldest written and therefore known Indo-European language, and as part of the ancient Oriental studies independent now. And these spectacular archaeological finds, the size of the city, but also its preservation, its very good preservation, and the extensive restoration work conducted by Peter Newe, we will see later on, made it possible to enroll Hattusha as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1968. It was one of the very first sites in Turkey to be enrolled. But interestingly or remarkably, also the cuneiform text archives were enrolled on the UNESCO World Memory List. And this is quite interesting because Hattusha is therefore the only site on both of those lists. That shows also the universal importance of this place. Here you can see again where we were. Well, we have seen the Great Temple. We have seen Büyükkale, the palace area. We visited a little bit the upper city with the gates, and in the center, the temples. The site has an overall size of about 200 hectares. Now I want to refer a little bit to our most recent or more recent research, which is dealing concerning the second millennium, mainly with chronology and with solving some questions, or solving the question how such a site was sustained in the ancient times. First, on the chronology, we were able to show that there is a continuous development, at least in the normal living areas from the pre-Hittite to the Hittite period. And the material culture also develops continuously. That was possible due to a deep sounding and a series of carbon dates. There are much more. So we can show that there was an uninterrupted development from the pre-Hittite state system, which we also saw the most spectacular example of in the morning, and the Hittite early kingdom. But what changed is the state. The state in its structure changes, and the state's attitude changes. And that is visible mainly through architecture. I highlighted here the red, with red, those buildings which were new. They are all monumental, they are all state sponsored, and they fill, as you might see in the comparison, they fill mainly this red area which was left free in the previous period, and with the monumental wall, with the monumental fortification wall, these parts were all together connected into one city. And then, as I already mentioned, the second urban turn, as I labeled it, in the 16th century, when the size of the city doubled. How was that? How did that function? Water and grain are the main features. The Hittites established a complicated system of ponds, as you have seen in the previous picture, and these ponds function in a very interesting way. In summer, there is no groundwater level. In winter, the water table is rising, and to perishable material, the water flows over 25 weeks into these ponds and stays there, because the ponds are dug into clayey areas. So by this way, and there are many other examples of this system, it is clear that they were able to establish these large ponds, which were not used for drinking water, but for feeding the animals. And another example is that of the large silos. I spoke about the storage systems and in the lower town for the short period or midterm storage. These are for long-term storage. Under vacuum-like conditions, it is possible to store grain for up to 20 years, and that allows people to restart the economy by using these materials as seeds, not to eat, and or to feed the animals. Another feature or another means to execute control and to execute a common ideology is the implementation of arts and the use of script, as I already mentioned. So we can see here a state building, a nation building process, if we want to use a modern term. How to preserve these things? We are confronted with several challenges. One are the large dumps of the older excavations and of our own excavations as well. And the other is the rising water table and the harsh winter conditions. Here's an extreme picture. Peter Neve developed based on the idea also, which comes also from Turkish scholar Halit Çambel, in the 60s, a system that covers both challenges. We backfill parts of the trenches and rebuild or build up the walls so that they stand up a little bit above the surface, and you can see the result here with this beautiful picture of one of the fortification systems. Here, and it's very flexible. We can use it in various parts of the city. And here in Yerkapa, if you go closer, you can see those stones which were already there when they were excavated and those which were then later added. Another feature is the replacement of original sculpture, which is of course moved to the museum, by copies either of concrete or nowadays other more suitable materials. And the last picture, my predecessor, Jürgen Seher, he wanted to show the visitors the third dimension of the city, and there was only one possible issue, that was the city walls. As you can see here, there are many fragments of those models, and we built a 1% of the city wall, so it's about 70 meters long, and that gave a quite interesting and impressive knowledge about how the Hittites built these monumental structures. And thank you again for appreciating our work, for inviting us to Shanghai to speak here. I thank you for your patience.